Little girl begs mountain man for help. He instantly bursts into tears when a lone mountain man trudges through the snow, his heart locked tight after years of sorrow. Then, out of the storm, a barefoot little girl collapses at his feet, whispering words that rip his soul wide open. "Please, mister, help my mama." He carries her through the blizzard, only to find a mother clinging to life and a secret powerful enough to stop a railroad in its tracks. But the moment he offers them shelter, he paints a target on his back. Gunman's circle. A town turns cold, and the mountain man, broken by grief, must decide whether to fight for strangers or surrender the only hope of family he may ever have again. Whispers of a hidden deed, a spring worth a fortune, and a widow's honor set the stage for a battle between greed and faith. What happens when the past comes roaring back and a man who's lost everything is asked to risk it all one more time? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Through the swirling snow, Ryan Brandt cradled the shivering Cherokee girl against his chest. Her small body felt like ice, and her bare feet were turning an alarming shade of blue. The howling December wind cut through his wool coat as he urged his tired mule forward, following Sheila's pointed finger toward a dim light in the distance. "How far to your mama?" Ryan asked, his voice rough from disuse. Living alone in his mountain cabin these past years, he rarely spoke above a whisper. Just over that rise," Sheila managed through chattering teeth. Past a big oak with two trunks. Ryan's heart clenched at her trembling voice. It brought back memories of his own little Sarah, gone these 5 years now. The same age as this child when the fever took her. He pushed the thoughts away and focused on warming Sheila, wrapping her tighter in his coat. "Hold on tight now," he murmured, clicking his tongue at the mule. The animal's hooves crunched through the crusty snow as they pressed forward. Ryan's tears from earlier had frozen on his cheeks, but the warmth of purpose filled his chest. This child needed him. Her mother needed him. The wind howled fiercer, driving ice crystals into his face. Ryan ducked his head and sheltered Sheila as best he could. Her small fingers clutched his shirt, reminding him of another little girl who'd once held on to him just as trustingly. The memory squeezed his heart like a fist. "Tell me about your mama," he said, trying to keep Sheila alert. "What happened to her?" "She got real sick 3 days ago," Sheila whispered. "The cough keeps getting worse. This morning she couldn't even stand up." Her voice cracked. "I tried to help, but I didn't know what to do." Then the fire went out. Ryan's jaw tightened. 3 days alone in this weather, with a sick mother and no fire? The situation was dire. He urged the mule to move faster, though the poor beast was struggling in the deep snow dot. The promised oak tree loomed ahead, its split trunk barely visible through the storm. Beyond it, Ryan made out a small cabin, its single window showing only the faintest glimmer of light. His experienced eye noted the lack of smoke from the chimney. "Not good. That's home," Sheila confirmed, pointing with a trembling hand. "Please hurry." Ryan didn't need the encouragement. He'd seen too many good people lost to winter's cruel grip. The memory of his wife Mary's face, pale and still, flashed through his mind. No, he wouldn't let that happen again. Not if he could help it. They reached the cabin door, and Ryan carefully set Sheila down to dismount. His boots crunched in the snow as he lifted her again and pushed open the door. The interior was dark and bitterly cold, barely warmer than outside. A single oil lamp guttered on a rough-hewn table, its fuel nearly spent. "Mama?" Sheila called out, her voice small and frightened dot in the dim light. Ryan saw a figure huddled under blankets on a narrow bed. The woman's breathing was labored, each inhale a painful wheeze. The sound took him back to Sarah's last night, and he had to steady himself against the doorframe. "I found help, Mama," Sheila said, wiggling free from Ryan's arms. She hurried to her mother's bedside, placing a small hand on the woman's forehead. "This man found me in the snow. He's going to help us." Ryan moved closer, shrugging off his snow-covered coat. The woman's face was flushed with fever, her dark hair damp with sweat despite the cold. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with effort. "My girl," she whispered hoarsely. "You shouldn't have. Too dangerous." "Hush now," Ryan said gently, falling back on long unused skills from his time as a Union field medic. "Save your strength. First thing is to get this place warm." He turned to Sheila, who watched him with desperate hope in her eyes. "Where's your woodpile, little one?" "Outside, but it's all wet from the snow," she said, lower lip trembling. "I couldn't get the fire started again." Ryan nodded, already moving toward the cold fireplace. "I've got dry tinder in my saddlebags, and we'll find a way." He paused, looking back at the sick woman and her brave daughter. Something stirred in his chest, something he thought had died with his family, the fierce need to protect, to care for others. The girl's earlier plea echoed in his mind. "Please, mister, help my mama. She's dying." The words that had cracked his shell of grief now fueled his determination. He might not have been able to save his own family, but maybe, just maybe, he could save this one. Ryan moved quickly to Sheila's side, his weathered face set with determination. "Show me where your mama is, little one." Sheila led him through the deepening snow to a crude lean-to nestled among towering pines. The makeshift shelter barely kept out the howling wind, its rough poles and branches offering scant protection from the brutal Colorado winter. Inside, Ada Littlebird lay on a thin pallet, her face ashen except for 2 bright spots of fever on her cheeks. A violent cough racked her slender frame, the sound wet and dangerous. Her cracked lips were tinged with blue, and her breathing came in labored gasps. Ryan's heart sank as he knelt beside her. After years of mountain living and his time as a field medic, he knew death's approach all too well. Without immediate help, Ada wouldn't survive until morning. "Ma'am," he said softly, touching her burning forehead. "I'm Ryan Brandt. Your girl found me, and I'm here to help." Ada's eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. She tried to speak, but another coughing fit seized her. Ryan wasted no time. He gathered dry pine branches and kindling from beneath the lean-to's overhang, quickly building a small fire. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he pulled a battered tin cup from his saddlebags. "Sheila, gather some green pine needles for me," he instructed, filling the cup with clean snow. The girl nodded and scurried to obey, her small fingers working quickly despite the cold. While the snow melted, Ryan stripped off his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around Ada's shivering form. The pine needles went into the hot water, steeping into a strong tea rich in vital nutrients. "Here now," he murmured, lifting Ada's head gently. "You need to drink this, every drop." He helped her sip the hot liquid slowly, supporting her through each coughing spell. The storm was worsening, thick flakes swirling down in the gathering darkness. Ryan knew they couldn't stay in the lean-to. His cabin was their only hope, but it lay nearly 2 miles away through treacherous terrain. Working swiftly, he gathered fallen branches and wove them into a crude sled, lashing the pieces together with leather straps from his gear. He laid his thickest blanket across it, then carefully lifted Ada onto the makeshift transport. "Sheila, climb up beside your mama," he directed, securing them both with rope. "Hold on to her tight now." Ryan's muscles, hardened by years of trapping and mountain living, strained as he began pulling the sled through the deepening snow. The wind cut like knives through his shirt, but he barely noticed. His world narrowed to the rhythm of his steps and the sound of Ada's labored, breathing behind him. The journey seemed endless. Snow filled his boots and frosted his beard, while sweat froze on his back. Still, Ryan pushed on, stopping only to check on his passengers and ensure the ropes held firm. Finally, As the first gray light of dawn crept into the sky, his cabin came into view. The solid log structure stood as a promise of warmth and shelter, smoke still rising from its stone chimney where he banked the fire that morning. Ryan's hands shook with exhaustion as he unlocked the door. The pot-bellied stove still held glowing coals, and he quickly fed them with dry wood until flames blazed high. The cabin's single room filled with blessed warmth, dot with infinite care. He lifted Ada from the sled and carried her to his own bed, the only proper one in the cabin. Her skin burned against his arms, and her breathing remained shallow and strained. Shallow and strained. Sheila stood in the middle of the room, swaying with fatigue. Ryan wrapped her in clean blankets and made her a nest of soft furs near the stove. "Sleep now, little one," he said gently. "I'll watch over your mama." Once Sheila's breathing deepened into sleep, Ryan sank to his knees beside the bed. For the first time in 5 years since he'd lost his Mary and Sarah, words of prayer rose to his lips. "Lord," he whispered hoarsely, "I ain't been much for talking to you lately. Been too angry, too lost in my grief." He glanced at Ada's fever-flushed face, then at Sheila's innocent form by the fire. "But these two need help. Real help. Don't let that girl lose her mama like." His voice broke. "Like my Sarah lost hers. Please." The prayer felt rusty and inadequate, but it was honest. Ryan rose stiffly, moving to check Ada's fever again. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside his lonely cabin, something long frozen had begun to thaw. Morning light crept through the frosted window panes, but the storm's fury hadn't lessened. Wind howled around the cabin's corners, driving fresh snow against the logs. Inside, Ryan stirred a pot of venison stew hanging over the fire, the rich aroma filling the small space. Ada's fever still burned high, but her breathing had eased somewhat during the night. Ryan ladled hot broth into a tin cup, cooling it slightly before approaching the bed. Sheila hovered at his elbow, her small fingers clutching the edge of his buckskin shirt. "Your mama needs to drink," Ryan said softly. "Help me lift her head a bit." Sheila scrambled onto the bed, carefully supporting her mother's shoulders. Ada's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition as Ryan held the cup to her cracked lips. "Small sips now," he encouraged. "That's right." Ada managed several swallows before a weak cough shook her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice rough. "You've been so kind." Her eyes darted to the window, fear flickering across her face. "But we shouldn't stay." "There are men." Ryan shook his head. "Save your strength, ma'am." Storm's too fierce for anyone to be tracking, but Ada's fingers clutched his wrist with surprising strength. "They threatened us, wanted our spring. The deed." Another cough cut off her words. "Rest now," Ryan said firmly, easing her back against the pillows. "No one's coming through this weather. You're safe here." He waited until Ada drifted back to sleep before rising. Questions crowded his mind, but they could wait. He needed wood for the stove, and the physical labor would help clear his head. "Stay with your mama," he told Sheila. "I won't be far." Outside, the bitter cold stung his face as Ryan trudged to his woodpile. The rhythmic swing of the axe helped order his thoughts. Who were these men Ada feared? What kind of men would threaten a widow and child over water rights? The questions turned as he split log after log, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. When his arms ached and a decent pile of wood lay ready, Ryan gathered an armload and returned to the cabin. Sheila looked up as he entered, her dark eyes serious in her small face. "Mr. Ryan?" she asked hesitantly, watching him stack wood near the stove. Did you ever have any children?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Ryan's hands froze on a piece of wood, his shoulders tensing. For a moment, he couldn't breathe past the familiar ache in his chest. But something in Sheila's innocent face, in her own vulnerability, made him turn. Slowly, He reached into his shirt and pulled out a small wooden cross hanging from a leather cord. "I had a daughter," he said quietly, his voice rough. "Mary. She was 8 years old when—" He swallowed hard. "When the fever took her and her mama both." Ryan's fingers traced the careful carving on the cross. "I made this for Mary. She loved watching me whittle." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I used to say my hands were magic, turning plain wood into pretty things." Sheila stepped closer, eyes wide with wonder as she studied the cross. Delicate flowers and leaves had been carved into the soft wood, worn smooth by years of handling. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Then, with the direct simplicity of childhood, "You must miss her awful bad." "Every day," Ryan admitted. To his surprise, the words didn't hurt as much as usual. Maybe because it was the first time he'd spoken of Mary to anyone in 5 years. Sheila reached out tentatively, touching the cross with one finger. "I promise I won't tell nobody about it," she said solemnly. "It can't be our secret." Ryan felt something shift in his chest, like ice cracking in spring thaw. "Much obliged, little one," he managed thought as evening settled in. Ryan sat in his old rocking chair by the hearth. The familiar creak of wood, the pop and snap of the fire, the soft sound of breathing from his unexpected guests, it all blended into something new. The cabin's quiet felt different now, filled with a warmth he'd almost forgotten could exist. He glanced at Sheila, curled up in her nest of blankets near the stove, then at Ada's sleeping form in his bed. Their presence had changed something in these 4 walls that had housed only his grief so long. Like spring water flowing into a dry creek bed, life was seeping back into places he'd thought forever barren. The wooden cross rested against his chest, a familiar weight carrying new meaning. For the first time in years, its touch brought comfort instead of pain. The morning sun finally broke through, melting icicles that hung from the cabin's eaves. Ryan stood at his door, breathing in the crisp air. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of white stretching toward the mountains. "Can I help?" Sheila's small voice came from behind him. She'd already pulled on her worn boots, eager to venture outside. Ryan glanced back at Ada, who nodded weakly from her bed. "Keep close," he told Sheila. "We'll need more wood now the storm's done." They crunched through knee-deep snow, Sheila following in Ryan's larger footprints. He carried his axe in one hand, the other ready to steady Sheila if she stumbled. The forest stood silent around them, branches heavy with snow. "Look!" Sheila pointed to rabbit tracks crossing their path. "Mama taught me to read animal signs." Ryan smiled, remembering teaching Mary the same thing. "Your mama's taught you well." He broke off, his tracker's eye catching something that didn't belong. Fresh hoof prints cut through the new snow, the impressions deep and clear. They weren't from his own mule. These were shod horses, at least 3, their trail leading up toward his ridge. His chest tightened. No one should be up this high, not after a storm like that. "Time to head back," he said quietly, lifting Sheila onto his hip. She started to protest but must have sensed his tension because she fell silent, wrapping her arms around his neck. Ryan gathered only what wood lay closest before hurrying back to the cabin. Inside, Ada had managed to sit up, though her face was still pale with fever. "Someone's been riding near," Ryan said, setting Sheila down. "Mind telling me what kind of trouble followed you up my mountain?" Ada's hands twisted in the blanket. "I should have told you sooner." Her voice trembled. "My husband, John, before he passed, he owned land with a spring. Pure, sweet water, never running dry, even in drought." She drew a shaky breath. "The railroad wants it for their steam engines. Said they'd pay, but it wasn't about money. That spring's been in John's family for generations. Sacred water, his grandmother called it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "After John died, they came again. Said a Cherokee widow had no right to refuse progress. Threatened to take Sheila if I didn't sign. So we ran. She pulled a folded paper from her dress. The deed's legal. John made sure before he died. But they don't care about legal, not when it comes to our kind. Sheila crept closer to Ryan, pressing against his side. Without thinking, he laid a protective hand on her shoulder. "Railroad men," he said grimly. "Reckon that explains the fancy horses." He'd seen their kind before, men who thought money gave them right to anything they wanted, who'd push aside anyone smaller, weaker, different. Ada tried to rise. "We've brought danger to your door. We should go." "You'll do no such thing," Ryan cut in. "You can barely stand, and there's no place safe to run with snow this deep." He looked down at Sheila, seeing Mary's face overlaid with hers. "I won't turn you out to freeze or worse. But they'll come," Ada whispered. "They always come." Ryan crossed to his rifle rack, checking the weapon's action. "Let them." His voice was quiet but carried steel. "This is my land. My choice who to shelter." He met Ada's eyes. "I aim to keep you both safe, long as you need." Sheila's arms wrapped around his waist. "You promise?" Ryan's hand found the wooden cross beneath his shirt. 5 years ago, he couldn't protect his own family. But maybe God had sent him a second chance. "I promise," he said softly. "No harm will come to you or your mama while you're under my roof." That night, after Sheila had fallen asleep, Ryan sat cleaning his rifle by lamplight. The familiar motion settled his mind, helped him think. 3 riders at least, probably more coming. Men used to taking what they wanted, not expecting resistance this far up the mountain. He glanced at Ada's sleeping form, at Sheila curled nearby. Their presence had awakened something he'd thought long dead, a fierce need to protect, to stand against the kind of men who'd threaten a child to get there. Weighed out, the rifle's metal gleamed in the lamplight as Ryan loaded it carefully. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. For the night, his unexpected guests slept safe, and he had preparations to make. 3 days after the storm, Ryan hitched his mule to a wooden sled while the morning frost still gripped the ground. Ada's fever had broken, but she remained weak, needing proper medicine. He'd stretched his supplies thin, feeding 3 mouths, and the railroad threat hung over them like storm clouds. "We need supplies," he announced, helping Ada wrap herself in his spare coat. "Town's our only choice." Sheila bounced with excitement at the prospect of an adventure, but Ada's face tightened with worry. "Perhaps I should stay. No splitting up," Ryan said firmly. "Not with those tracks still fresh on the ridge." He lifted Sheila onto the sled, then helped Ada settle beside her, tucking warm blankets around them both. The small mining town lay nestled in the valley below, smoke rising from chimneys against the winter sky. As they approached, Ryan felt Ada tense beside him. He understood why frontier towns could be harsh places for native folks, even peaceful ones with legal claims to land. The main street stretched before them, morning business already underway. Horses stamped at hitching posts while shopkeepers swept their wooden walkways. As Ryan guided the mule down the street, heads turned. Whispers followed them like shadows. Outside the general store, Ryan helped Ada down, keeping a steadying hand at her elbow. Her Cherokee dress, though neat and well-made, drew sharp stares from passing townspeople. A group of women pulled their children closer as they passed. The store's bell jingled as they entered. Mr. Peterson, the shopkeeper, looked up from his ledger. His usual welcome died on his lips when he saw Ada. "Brant," he said stiffly. "Didn't expect to see you in town so soon after the storm." "Need supplies," Ryan replied evenly, setting his list on the counter. "Flour, cornmeal, coffee, and quinine, if you've got it." Behind them, 2 ranchers' wives whispered loudly enough to be heard. "Indians squatting up near Brant's cabin, I heard. Railroad won't like that none." Ryan's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on Peterson. The shopkeeper hesitated, then began gathering the items. Sheila pressed closer to her mother's skirts. Her earlier excitement fading. Ada stood straight-backed, dignity wrapped around her like armor, but Ryan saw the hurt in her eyes. He moved slightly, positioning himself between her and the whispering women. "That'll be $4.50, Peterson said, pushing the supplies across the counter. His gaze slid past Ada as if she wasn't there. Ryan counted out the money carefully. "Much obliged," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. He gathered the supplies into his arms, nodding for Ada and Sheila to follow. Outside, he stored their purchases in the sled. "One more stop," he said quietly. The church. The small white building sat at the edge of town, its steeple reaching toward heaven. Unlike the tension in town, here they found a warmer welcome. Reverend Matthews stood at the door, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Ryan Brandt," the old preacher said warmly. "It's been too long." His kind eyes took in Ada and Sheila without judgment. "Welcome to God's house, friends. Inside." The Reverend listened as Ryan explained Ada's illness, nodding sympathetically. "I believe we have some medicine stored away," he said, disappearing into the back room. He returned with a small bottle. "A gift," he added when Ryan reached for his money pouch. "The Lord's mercy knows no boundaries." Ada's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, the first words she'd spoken in town. As they prepared to leave, voices drifted through the church's open window. "Railroad agents due in tomorrow. About time they dealt with these Indian squatters proper." Ada's face fell, shame coloring her cheeks. But Ryan had heard enough. He took her hand firmly in his, surprising them both with the gesture. "Head high," he murmured, loud enough for only her to hear. "You've nothing to be ashamed of." He helped them back onto the sled, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed them down the street. Ada's hand remained in his until they reached the edge of town, her fingers cold but grateful in his warm grip, as they climbed back toward his cabin. Ryan glanced at Ada's proud profile against the winter sky. The town's treatment of her and Sheila had awakened something fierce in his chest, a protective anger he hadn't felt since Mary died. These women had done nothing to deserve such scorn, and he found himself silently vowing they wouldn't face it alone. Sheila huddled closer to her mother, humming a soft Cherokee lullaby. The sound drifted back to Ryan's ears, reminding him that some things, like a child's trust and a mother's love, knew no boundaries of race or custom. He clicked to his mule, urging them faster toward home, where, at least for now, they could find shelter from more than just a winter wind. Night settled over the mountain, bringing with it a bitter cold that made the cabin's logs creak. Ryan stoked the fire, adding another log while Ada tucked Sheila into bed. The girl had fallen asleep, clutching the wooden cross Ryan had carved for Mary, her small fingers wrapped tight around it. A knock at the door startled them both. Ryan reached for his rifle, but through the window, he recognized Reverend Matthews' familiar silhouette in the moonlight. He opened the door, letting in a blast of cold air along with the elderly preacher. "Sorry to disturb you so late," Reverend Matthews said, stamping snow from his boots. "But after today, I felt led to come." He nodded respectfully to Ada, who had risen from Sheila's bedside. Ryan pulled out a chair for the preacher. "Coffee?" "Much obliged." The Reverend settled himself close to the fire, his eyes grave. "Mrs. Littlebird, I knew your husband." Ada's breath caught. She sank slowly into another chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "John Littlebird was a good man," the preacher continued. "He came to me about 6 months before his passing, worried about the railroad's interest in his spring. He showed me something important, a deed to that water, signed by the territorial governor himself." Ryan stopped mid-pour, the coffee steaming in the tin cup. "A legal deed?" "Yes." The Reverend leaned forward. "If you still have that document, Mrs. Littlebird, it gives you full rights to the spring. Strong enough to stop even the railroad from taking it." Ada's eyes widened. She rose quickly, moving to her small leather satchel near the bed. From it, she withdrew a worn oilcloth packet, handling it like it held gold. Perhaps it did, Ryan thought, watching her carefully unfold the wrappings. The document inside was yellowed but intact, protected by the oilcloth from weather and wear. Ryan took it gently, holding it close to the lamplight. The territorial governor's flowing signature sprawled across the bottom, accompanied by an official seal pressed into red wax. "Lord above," he whispered. Here was the proof, legal and binding, that the spring belonged to Ada and Sheila. "If the railroad knows you have this," Reverend Matthews warned, his voice low to avoid waking Sheila, "they'll stop at nothing to get it. That water source is crucial for their planned route through the pass." Ada's hands trembled. "The men who came before, they demanded to know if John left papers. I told them nothing, but they searched our cabin while I was gathering herbs." Her voice broke. "When they found nothing, they burned it down." Ryan's jaw clenched at the thought of those men terrorizing Ada and Sheila. He studied the deed again, mind working. "We need to hide this somewhere safe." Moving to the corner of the cabin, he pried up a loose floorboard, revealing a cedar box beneath. It was where he had kept Mary's few remaining possessions: a hair ribbon, a small Bible, the last letter from his wife before the fever took them both. Now he added the deed, wrapping it carefully in the oilcloth before securing the box and replacing the board. Reverend Matthews nodded approval. "I'll pray for you all," he said, rising. "These coming days won't be easy." Ryan walked the preacher to the door. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, "for telling us about the deed. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Ryan." The old man squeezed his shoulder. "Perhaps he led you to find them in that storm for just this purpose." After the preacher left, Ryan turned to find Ada standing in the middle of the room, her face drawn with worry. "I've brought danger to your door," she whispered. "You've shown such kindness, and now—" "Stop." Ryan crossed to her, taking her cold hands in his work-roughened ones. "You're not alone anymore." The words came from deep in his heart, surprising him with their fierce certainty. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Ada's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. In the firelight, Ryan saw strength there, matching his own determination. She squeezed his hands once, a gesture of trust that moved him more than words could have. Near the bed, Sheila stirred in her sleep, murmuring something in Cherokee. Ada smiled softly, the worry easing from her face for a moment. Ryan released her hands, but the connection remained, a promise made in the quiet of a mountain night, witnessed by the dancing flames and the silent stars beyond the cabin walls. Morning. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's small window, casting warm squares of light across the plank floor. Ada stood at the cook stove, her strength finally returning after days of rest. The smell of corn cakes sizzling in the cast iron pan filled the cabin with a homey aroma that made Ryan's heart ache with memories. He watched from his chair by the fire as she expertly flipped each cake, her movements growing steadier than they'd been since he'd found her in the storm. The familiar domestic sounds, the scrape of the spatula, the pop of cornmeal hitting hot iron stirred something deep inside him that he'd thought long buried. "Smells mighty fine," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Ada turned, offering a gentle smile. "It's the least I can do, after all your care." She slid 3 golden cakes onto a tin plate. "Sheila, come eat while they're hot." The little girl bounded in from where she'd been watching Ryan work at his wooden bench. He'd been teaching her to whittle that morning, guiding her small hands with the knife as they shaped a piece of pine into the beginning of a bird. "Can we whittle more after breakfast?" Sheila asked, settling at the table. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm that reminded Ryan sharply of Mary's love for crafts. "Reckon we can," he answered, finding himself smiling despite the bittersweet memory. "That bird needs wings yet. They ate together, the corn cakes drizzled with the last of Ryan's honey. The quiet sounds of their meal felt right somehow, as if the cabin had been waiting all these years to hold such simple fellowship again. After breakfast, Ryan headed outside to split more firewood. The rhythmic thunk of his axe kept time with Ada's humming from within. The Cherokee lullaby drifted through the cabin walls, soft and sweet, making his work feel lighter somehow. He found himself pausing between swings, just to listen. Inside, Sheila sat cross-legged on the floor near his workbench, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration as she carefully shaped the wooden bird's wing. Ryan had smoothed down the knife's edge to keep her safe, but her determination to learn made his chest swell with pride. "Like this?" she asked, holding up her work. "Just so," he nodded, setting down his tools to examine her progress. "You've got a natural talent there." The afternoon passed in peaceful industry. Ada swept the cabin floor and hung fresh herbs to dry from the rafters, while Ryan showed Sheila how to sand the rough edges of their carving smooth. The girl's laughter at her own clumsy attempts filled corners of the cabin that had been silent far too long. As evening approached, Ada stirred a pot of venison stew that had been simmering all day. The rich aroma mixed with wood smoke from the fire, creating an atmosphere of comfort Ryan had almost forgotten could exist. They gathered around the table, steam rising from their bowls. Ryan cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. "Mind if I say grace?" he asked, looking at Ada. Her eyes softened. "Please do." Ryan bowed his head, his calloused hands clasped before him. "Lord," he began, his voice catching slightly, "we thank you for this food, and for bringing new life to this old cabin." He had to pause, struggling past the emotion tightening his throat. "Thank you for second chances. Amen." When he looked up, he caught Ada watching him, her expression full of gratitude that made his heart turn over. Sheila reached across the table and squeezed his hand with her small one. "I wish," she whispered, then stopped, suddenly shy. "What is it, little one?" Ryan encouraged gently. "I wish you were my papa," she said in a rush, then ducked her head, spooning stew into her mouth as if to hide behind the action. Ryan felt tears sting his eyes and quickly blinked them away, forcing a smile instead. But the word papa echoed in his chest, awakening longings he'd tried to forget. He glanced at Ada and found her gaze steady on him, something unspoken passing between them. Night settled over the mountain like a soft blanket. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Ryan sat in his chair, whittling the final touches on the wooden bird while Sheila dozed in Ada's lap. Ada hummed her lullaby again, rocking slightly, her fingers gently stroking her daughter's dark hair. The scene before him was so peaceful, so right, that Ryan had to take a deep breath against the surge of emotion it caused. This was what a home should feel like, what his cabin had once been, and somehow, against all odds, was becoming again. The wooden bird took shape beneath his knife, wings spread as if ready to take flight. Like hope itself, rising from the ashes of grief, ready to soar once more. The peaceful morning shattered with the thunder of hooves. Ryan had just stepped outside to feed his mule when 6 riders emerged from the tree line, their horses' breaths steaming in the cold mountain air. His heart seized as he recognized the man in front, Silas Granger, the railroad agent, his black coat dusted with snow and his eyes hard as steel. Ryan's rifle leaned against the cabin wall, just out of reach. He squared his shoulders, positioning himself between the riders and his door. Inside, he heard Ada's sharp intake of breath as she spotted the men through the window. "Brett," Granger called out, reining his horse to a stop. "Step aside. We've come for the widow and her girl." 2 rough-looking men with guns flanked him on either side, their hands resting on their holsters. "This here's my property," Ryan answered, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "And they're under my protection." Granger's lip curled. "Protection? From a broken-down mountain man? He swung down from his saddle, boots crunching in the snow. The railroad's offering fair compensation for that spring. No need for anyone to get hurt. The deed's legal, Ryan said. Governor himself signed it. Nothing fair about stealing from a widow. Stealing? Granger barked a laugh that held no humor. We're bringing progress to these mountains. Can't let one stubborn woman hold back civilization. The cabin door creaked open behind Ryan. No, he growled. But Ada stepped out anyway, Sheila clutching her skirts. Mr. Granger, Ada said, her voice clear and strong. My husband died protecting our land. I won't dishonor his memory by giving it up. Granger's face darkened. That's your final word? It is. Everything happened fast then. Granger nodded to his men, and two of them dismounted, moving toward Ryan with purpose. He managed to land a solid punch on the first one's jaw, but the second caught him from behind. They drove him to his knees in the snow, kicks landing against his ribs. His rifle clattered away as they knocked it from the wall. Sheila screamed. Through the haze of pain, Ryan saw Ada holding her daughter back, her face white with terror. Granger stepped close, looking down at Ryan with contempt. 1 week, he said. Turn them over by week's end, or we'll burn this cabin to the ground with you in it. He kicked snow in Ryan's face. Progress is coming, whether you like it or not. The riders mounted up, wheeling their horses around. Granger's voice carried on the wind as they thundered away. 1 week, Brant. Ryan stayed on his knees until the sound of hooves faded, each breath sending sharp pains through his chest. Then small hands were touching his face, and Sheila's tears fell warm on his cheeks. You're hurt, she sobbed, her fingers gentle on the bruise forming along his jaw. They hurt you because of us. Hush now, he managed, pulling himself to his feet with a groan. Worth every bruise to keep you safe. Ada rushed to support him as he swayed. Inside, she urged, let me tend those wounds. By the fire, Ada cleaned the cuts on his face with gentle hands, her touch careful as she applied herb-soaked cloths to the worst bruises. Sheila wouldn't leave his side, her small body pressed against him as if to shield him from further harm. I should go, Ada whispered finally, her voice breaking. Pack our things tonight. Slip away before dawn. You've suffered enough for our sake. Ryan caught her wrist as she turned away, his grip gentle but firm. No, he said hoarsely. Don't you see? There's nowhere you could run that men like Granger wouldn't find you. And I? He swallowed hard. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you both. But you're home. Ain't been much of a home till you came, he admitted. Just walls and memories. Now it's alive again. Worth fighting for. Worth fighting for. Ada's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her forehead to their joined hands, her shoulders shaking. Sheila wrapped her arms around them both, creating a circle of warmth in the firelight. That night, after Ada and Sheila had fallen into uneasy sleep, Ryan knelt by his bed for the first time since Mary died. Lord, he whispered, his bruised body aching, I'm scared. Not for myself, but for them. Show me how to protect them. Give me the strength to stand against what's coming. Outside, wolves began to howl in the distance, their mournful voices echoing off the mountainsides. Ryan listened to their wild song, torn between fear of what the next week would bring and the fierce love that had awakened in his heart. In the soft darkness, he heard Ada stirring, knew she lay awake too, sharing his vigil as the wolves called to the moon and the wind whispered through the pines. Sunday morning painted the mountains in soft rose light. Ryan adjusted his faded but clean Sunday coat, watching Ada help Sheila smooth her dark hair. His heart swelled at the sight of them, dressed in their simple best, ready for church despite the danger hanging over them. Reckon we should stay home, Ada said quietly, touching the bruise still visible on Ryan's jaw. Keep safe another day. Ryan shook his head. Can't hide forever. Ain't right to let fear keep us from the Lord's house. He picked up his Bible, weathered leather soft in his hands. Besides, standing together in the open might be the bravest thing we can do. The small log chapel sat nestled among pines at the edge of town, its rough-hewn walls glowing amber in the morning sun. As Ryan helped Ada and Sheila down from the wagon, he felt the weight of stares from folks gathering near the steps. Whispers rose like rustling leaves. Inside, the familiar scent of pine sap and lamp oil filled the air. Ryan led Ada and Sheila to a pew near the middle, refusing to slink to the back like they had something to hide. Sheila's small hand gripped his tightly as more people filed in, their gazes sharp with judgment. When the first hymn began, Amazing Grace, the usual robust singing faltered. Voices dropped away as heads turned toward Ryan's pew. But Ada's clear voice rose steady and true, joined by Sheila's sweet soprano. Ryan added his own deep bass, the words washing over him with renewed meaning. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. After the final amen, before folks could scatter, Marcus Turner, the livery stable owner, stepped into the aisle. His face was flushed with the self-righteousness of fear. "Ryan Brandt," he called out, loud enough for all to hear, "you're bringing trouble down on all our heads, harboring those who'd stand against progress. Railroad means jobs, means trade, means our children might have a future here." Ryan stood slowly, his voice calm but carrying to every corner. "Progress built on stolen land ain't progress at all, Marcus. It's just greed wearing a finer coat." He looked around the chapel, meeting hostile gazes. "Justice belongs to God, not railroad men. If we stay silent while they rob widows and orphans, what kind of future are we really building?" "Now see here," Marcus started, but the preacher's firm voice cut through. "Brother Turner," the old man said, moving to stand beside Ryan, "our friend speaks truth. Have we forgotten the Lord's words about caring for widows? About protecting the stranger within our gates?" His gentle rebuke spread shame across faces throughout the congregation. This church must stand for what's right, not what's easy. A few heads nodded. Mrs. Peterson, the seamstress, stepped forward to squeeze Ada's hand. The schoolteacher smiled warmly at Sheila. But as people began filing out, Ryan caught movement through the window. Two of Granger's gunmen sat their horses across the street, watching. The morning sun glinted off their rifle barrels. Tension coiled in Ryan's gut like a rattler about to strike. He guided Ada and Sheila out quickly, helping them into the wagon while keeping himself between them and the gunman's sight. The riders made no move, but their message was clear. They were being watched. The drive home was quiet, save for the creak of wagon wheels and the soft sound of Ada humming a hymn. Back at the cabin, as Ryan unhitched the horse, Ada touched his arm. "Thank you," she whispered, her dark eyes bright with unshed tears. "For standing with us, for making us feel human again." Ryan's throat tightened. "Ain't nothing to thank me for. Just doing what's right." Sheila slipped her small hand into his. "I'm not scared," she said firmly. "Not when you're here." She pressed close against his side, reminding him so much of Mary that his heart ached. "You're brave like my papa was." Ryan gathered her close, including Ada in his embrace. They stood there together in the Sunday morning light, three souls bound by something stronger than fear. The threat still loomed, dark as storm clouds on the horizon, but in that moment, Ryan felt the strength of conviction flowing through him like a mountain, stream pure and unstoppable. The gunman's presence in town was a stark reminder that time was running out. Only 4 days remained until Granger's deadline. But as Ryan looked at Ada's quiet dignity and Sheila's trust-filled eyes, he knew with bone-deep certainty that he'd chosen the right path. No matter where it led. The crackle of flames jolted Ryan from sleep. Thick smoke rolled across the cabin's ceiling, and an orange glow filtered through the roof shingles. His lungs burned with the first breath. Fire, Ada. Sheila! He leaped from his bedroll, heart pounding. The heat pressed down like a furnace lid. Ada was already moving, wrapping Sheila in a blanket. Ryan! Her voice cracked with terror. The roof timbers groaned overhead, sparks raining down through widening gaps. Ryan grabbed his rifle and powder horn, then thrust the deed box from beneath the floorboards into Ada's arms. Out the back door now! They stumbled into the frigid night air. Stars wheeled overhead, mocking the destruction below. The cabin's roof was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward heaven like grasping fingers. A rifle shot cracked through the night. Splinters flew from the doorframe beside Ryan's head. He shoved Ada and Sheila behind the woodpile, raising his own weapon. There they are! A voice shouted from the darkness. More shots followed. Ryan fired back. The rifle's report thunderous in the night. A cry of pain answered he'd hit someone. But more shadows moved in the tree line, closing in. Run! He yelled to Ada and Sheila. Head for the creek bottom. They sprinted toward the darkness, but two riders emerged from the shadows, cutting off their escape. In the firelight, Ryan saw Silas Granger's sneering face beneath his hat brim. Grab them, Granger ordered. Ryan fired again, but his shot went wide. A bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Through blurred vision, he saw Ada fighting like a wildcat as rough hands seized her. Sheila's scream pierced the night. Mama! Ryan! He tried to rise, but another blow sent him sprawling. The world tilted sideways. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard hoofbeats retreating into the darkness, carrying Ada and Sheila away. Their cries faded until only the roar of flames remained. Ryan lay in the snow, blood seeping into his shirt, watching his home burn. The heat blistered his face, but he barely felt it. Everything he had rebuilt, everyone he had come to love gone in a heartbeat. Just like before. Just like Mary. Grief crushed down on his chest harder than the smoke. He wanted to close his eyes, to let the cold take him, to surrender to the darkness that had haunted him for so long. What was the point of fighting anymore? His hand brushed something in his pocket. Fingers trembling, he pulled out the tiny wooden cross, the one he'd carved for Mary, the one Sheila had slipped into his coat that very evening. In the firelight, the simple lines glowed with remembered love. Keep it safe, she had whispered, hugging him tight. It'll protect you like you protect us. Ryan's throat tightened. He pressed the cross to his lips, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. Those two precious souls needed him. God had sent them to heal his broken heart, and now they faced terror and death because he had failed them. No, he growled, pushing himself to his knees. Not again. Not ever again. The cabin's walls collapsed inward with a thunderous crash, sending a geyser of sparks skyward. Ryan staggered to his feet, swaying but upright. His shoulder throbbed, but the bullet had only grazed him. He was alive, and as long as he drew breath, he would not abandon them. He looked up at the star-strewn sky, clutching the small cross. Lord, he whispered hoarsely, I ain't been much for praying these past years. Been too angry, too lost in my own pain. But I'm asking now, give me strength. Help me bring them home. Strength. Help me bring them home. The flames roared behind him, consuming the last of his solitude, burning away his final excuses for hiding from life and love. In their place, steel-hard resolve crystallized in his heart. He had let death win once before. Not this time. Ryan gathered what supplies he could salvage: ammunition, canteen, his old army coat. The night wind carried the acrid smell of smoke and vengeance. Somewhere out there, Granger and his men were riding hard with their captives, believing they had won, but they didn't know the mountain man they had awakened. They didn't understand the power of a father's love reborn. Ryan checked his rifle, tucked Mary's cross safely against his heart, and set out into the darkness. His own blood marked the snow behind him as he tracked the horse's trail by starlight. Every step was a prayer, every breath a promise. He would find them. He would save them. Or he would die trying. Above him, the flames painted the clouds red, like God's own anger burning in the sky. The first pale light of morning found Ryan Brandt kneeling in the ashes of his burned cabin. Smoke still curled from blackened timbers, and the bitter smell of destruction hung heavy in the air. His shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, but he ignored the pain, focusing instead on prying up the scorched floorboards with trembling hands. Relief flooded through him when his fingers found the metal strongbox, still intact beneath the ruins. The deed was safe. He tucked it inside his coat, close to where Mary's wooden cross rested against his heart. Standing slowly, Ryan surveyed the devastation. The home he had rebuilt after losing his family lay in ruins once again. But this time, he would not let grief paralyze him. His old mule nickered softly from where it was tethered to a surviving fence post. Ryan gathered his rifle and what few supplies remained, then swung into the saddle. The beast's steady gait carried him down the mountain trail toward town, each step bringing him closer to confronting Granger and his men. The sun had barely cleared the eastern peaks when Ryan reached the church. The preacher was already awake, tending the stove in his small adjacent home. His eyes widened at Ryan's appearance, clothes smoke-stained, face grimy, dry blood on his shirt. "Good Lord, Ryan. What happened?" The older man ushered him inside. Ryan's voice was rough as he recounted the night's events. "They took them, Reverend. Burned me out and stole Ada and Sheila away." His hands clenched into fists. Granger means to force the spring sale through, legal or not. The preacher's normally gentle face hardened. "This violence must stop." He gripped Ryan's shoulder. "We'll help you, son. But remember, vengeance belongs to the Lord. We must fight this battle with truth and law, not hatred." Ryan nodded slowly, though his heart still burned for revenge. "Will you help me gather the townspeople? They need to know what kind of man Granger really is." "I'll ring the church bell." The preacher agreed. "Those who have ears to hear will come." The bell's clear tones rang out across the valley as the morning brightened. One by one, curious townspeople began arriving at the small log church. Ryan recognized faces from the general store, the livery stable, the boarding house. Some looked at him with suspicion, others with concern. When about 30 people had gathered, the preacher stood before them. "Friends and neighbors," he began, "we face a grave test of our community's conscience. Last night, violence was done in our valley." Ryan stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. The story poured out of him. Ada's legal deed to the spring, Granger's threats, the burning of his cabin, the kidnapping of a mother and her innocent child. As he spoke, he saw shock and anger replace the doubt in many faces. "That spring belongs to Ada Littlebird by right and law," Ryan declared, producing the deed. "Granger means to steal it through force and fear. Will we stand by and let that happen?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Tom Webster, the livery owner, spoke up. "The railroad's powerful, Ryan. They can make life mighty difficult for folks who cross them. And what of our souls?" The preacher countered. "What profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his very self? This is about more than water rights. It's about who we are as a community." Several men nodded. Frank Miller, a rancher who had lost grazing land to the railroad, stepped forward. "I'll stand with you, Ryan. Been waiting for someone to take a proper stand against Granger's bullying." Others followed: the blacksmith, 2 more ranchers, the deputy sheriff. Not everyone, but enough to show Ryan he wasn't alone. The preacher smiled, seeing justice awakening in his congregation. "Granger's arranged a land auction for noon today," Ryan told them. "Means to push through a fake sale while he holds Ada prisoner. But with the real deed and witnesses to his crimes, we can stop him." The preacher laid a steadying hand on Ryan's arm. "Remember, son, our weapon is the truth, not the gun. Violence will only feed violence. Ryan struggled with this counsel, his fingers still itching for the trigger. But he thought of Shyla's innocent face, of Ada's quiet strength. What example would he set by answering evil with evil? "I hear you, Reverend," he said finally. "We'll do this right. But I won't let them hurt Ada and Sheila." The men gathered around to plan their approach to the auction. The deputy promised to have his pistol ready if needed, but agreed to let the law work first. The preacher would testify to the deed's authenticity. Others would bear witness to the night's crimes. As the sun climbed higher, Ryan felt hope stirring beneath his anger. He wasn't the lone wolf anymore, bitter and isolated. These people, this community, were choosing to stand for justice. Perhaps God had led him to this moment, using even his pain and loss to serve a greater purpose. The town square buzzed with tension under the midday sun. Townsfolk and ranchers gathered in clusters, their faces tight with worry. At the courthouse steps, Silas Granger had arranged a makeshift auction block, his smirk visible beneath his well-trimmed mustache. 2 hired guns flanked his wagon where Ada and Sheila Littlebird sat bound, their faces drawn but proud. Ryan stood at the back of the crowd, the deed secure in his coat pocket. The preacher and Frank Miller stayed close beside him, while other allies spread through the gathering. Tom Webster's hand rested near his holster, and the deputy sheriff watched from the boardwalk, badge glinting. Granger raised his hands for silence. "Good people of Mountain Creek, we're here to auction prime watershed land, including the valuable mountain spring." His voice carried across the square. "Opening bid starts at $500. A few of Granger's men called out bids, their voices eager but hollow. Ryan's jaw tightened as he watched Sheila struggle against her bonds. Ada caught his eye, giving a slight shake of her head, warning him to wait. Just as the bidding reached $1,000, Ryan stepped forward. His boots struck the wooden steps with purpose, each step echoing in the sudden quiet. "This auction's a fraud, Granger." Granger's face darkened. "You're not welcome here, Brandt. This is legitimate business." "Is kidnapping legitimate?" Ryan's voice carried across the square. "Is burning honest folks out of their homes?" He reached into his coat and withdrew the oilskin packet. The territorial governor's seal caught the sunlight as he held it high. "This here's the true deed to that spring, signed and witnessed proper." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The preacher stepped forward, his white collar stark against his black coat. "I can testify to this document's authenticity. I've seen it before, when John Littlebird first received it from the governor himself. Let me read it aloud." The preacher continued, taking the deed carefully. His clear voice carried as he read, "By authority of the territory of Colorado, this deed grants full rights and title to the mountain spring and surrounding 10 acres to John Littlebird and his heirs. Signed and sealed this 15th day of May, 1875. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Frank Miller called out, "That's a legal deed, Granger. You can't sell what ain't yours to sell." Granger's face twisted with rage. "Seize that paper," he shouted to his men, "and grab Brandt." But as his gunmen moved forward, rifles cocked throughout the crowd. Tom Webster and 3 ranchers stepped up beside Ryan, weapons ready. The deputy moved in from the side, his star catching the sun. "Don't try it," the deputy warned Granger's men. "You're outnumbered, and we won't stand for any more violence in our town." Granger's hired guns hesitated, looking to their boss. The railroad agent's face had gone pale with fury as he realized his scheme was collapsing. More townspeople were moving to surround his wagon, their faces set with determination. "This isn't over," Granger snarled. He jerked his reins, turning his horse sharply. "The railroad won't forget this interference." "The railroad might be interested in how their agent conducts business," the preacher called after him. "Kidnapping and arson don't look good in territorial court." Granger's men scrambled to their horses as the agent spurred away, dust rising from his retreat. Two ranchers quickly moved to free Ada and Sheila from the wagon. The moment her bonds fell away, Sheila ran straight for Ryan. He caught her up in his arms as she sobbed against his shoulder. Ada followed more slowly, her dignity intact despite her ordeal. When she reached them, Ryan pulled her into his embrace as well, holding both of them close. "You did it," Ada whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved our land." "We did it," Ryan corrected, looking at the townspeople gathering around them. "All of us together." The preacher stepped forward, holding out the deed. "This belongs to you, Mrs. Littlebird. No one can challenge your right to that spring now." Ada took the document with trembling hands, tears gleaming in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, looking at the faces around her. "Thank you all." Sheila hadn't let go of Ryan's neck. "Can we go home now?" she asked in a small voice. Ryan's heart clenched, remembering his burned cabin. But before he could speak, Frank Miller stepped forward. "My family's got a spare cabin near the creek," he offered. "It needs some fixing up, but it's yours until we can help Ryan rebuild." "That's if you're planning to stay?" His eyes met Ryan's with understanding. Ryan looked down at Sheila's hopeful face, then Ada's questioning eyes. The answer came easily, straight from his healing heart. "Yes," he said firmly. "We're staying." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Mountain Creek's main street as wagons rolled up to the preacher's parsonage. Women carried steaming dishes wrapped in cloth, while men hauled timber and tools. The shame of their earlier coldness toward Ada and Sheila showed in their downcast eyes and gentle offerings. Sarah Miller, the storekeeper's wife, approached Ada with a stack of quilts. "These aren't much, but they're warm," she said softly. "I'm sorry we weren't kinder before." Ada accepted the quilts with quiet grace. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. "Your kindness now means more than past hurts." Sheila darted between the bustling townspeople, her eyes bright with wonder at the transformation. She helped Mrs. Webster sort through baskets of preserved fruit and fresh bread, carefully carrying jars to the parsonage kitchen. The child who had stumbled through snow weeks ago now moved with confidence among her new neighbors. Near the burned remains of Ryan's cabin, men gathered with axes and saws. Tom Webster stepped forward, his hat in his hands. "Ryan, we've got enough timber here to raise a cabin twice as big as your old one." Frank's already marked some prime logs on his property for cutting. The preacher raised his hands for attention, and the crowd gathered close. "Let us pray," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Lord, we thank you for opening our eyes to truth and justice. Help us build not just a home of wood and nails, but a community of acceptance and love." "Amen," the townspeople echoed, their voices joining as one. Ada stood straight and proud before them. "My husband loved this land," she said clearly. "He believed in its promise, just as I do. With Ryan's help, we'll honor that promise." Her eyes met Ryan's, filled with quiet determination. The women set up tables with food while the men began clearing the burned timber. Children played near the fresh lumber, and Sheila's laughter rang out as she chased the Webster twins around stacks of planking. As evening approached, they gathered in the preacher's warm parlor. The small room glowed with lamplight, and the scent of coffee mingled with pine smoke from the hearth. Sheila curled up on a cushioned chair, her eyes heavy with contentment. Ryan sat beside Ada on the settee, watching the firelight dance. The day's events washed over him like a cleansing rain, and words rose from his heart. "God took ashes," he said slowly, "and gave us family." Ada's hand found his in the soft light. Her fingers were work-worn but gentle, speaking of strength and tenderness combined. Ryan held on, feeling the promise in that touch. Around them, the parsonage creaked softly, offering shelter until their new home could rise from the ruins of the old. Looking at Sheila's peaceful face and feeling Ada's hand in his, Ryan understood that out of loss and fear, something precious had grown, a family forged in winter storms and spring promises, bound together by love stronger than any deed. The mountain winds whispered softly around the new cabin as February sunshine glinted off fresh fallen snow. Smoke curled from the stone chimney like a welcoming banner against the crystal-clear sky. Inside, warmth and savory aromas filled every corner of the sturdy home that loving hands had built. Ada stirred a pot of venison stew, adding pinches of herbs she'd dried and stored in twine bundles from the rafters. The cabin was larger than Ryan's old one, with 2 proper bedrooms and a kitchen that made Ada smile every time she worked in it. "Hold it higher, Papa Ryan," Sheila called out, watching as Ryan carefully positioned the wooden bird he'd carved. Its wings spread wide above the river rock hearth, catching the afternoon light that streamed through the windows. After the dishes were cleared from supper, they knelt together beside the fire. Ryan's voice caught as he began to pray. "Lord," he whispered, "you've given back what I thought was gone forever. A home, a family, hope." Tears traced down his weathered cheeks as Ada's fingers twined with his. Sheila nestled against his side, her small hand patting his arm. "Don't cry, Papa Ryan. We're home now." Later, Ryan stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the crisp mountain air. The peaks stood dark against the star-filled sky, but they no longer seemed like monuments to his grief. Now they watched over his family like faithful guardians. Lamplight spilled golden through the windows, drawing him back inside where love waited. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.